Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternities, a review for Captive Pursuit, which is episode 5 of season 1 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video, I covered the first season episode, Captive Pursuit. So Captive Pursuit is the episode in which the first alien visitor from the Gamma Quadrant comes through. He's acting a bit shy and a bit weird. His culture is obviously very different, but he's also seems to be hiding something. But O'Brien makes friends with him, but then he is caught trying to break into the weapons locker and thrown in the brig. But then a group of aliens come through the wormhole looking for him, and they attack the station. But after a brief attack, they find him in the holding cell, and then they reveal that the original alien that came through the wormhole, Tosk, is in fact prey for their ritualistic hunt, which is part of their culture. And Sisko, tied by the limits of the Prime Directive, must turn Tosk over to these hunters. However, O'Brien, having made friends with Tosk, doesn't want to see him caught and humiliated, so he helps Tosk to escape and fight off the hunters, in which they farewell each other in good faith. And then Sisko, dresses down O'Brien for breaking the rules, but actually did help him to escape. So, when this episode first came out, it was considered the best episode of Deep Space Nine. That is, by the end of season 1, before any other seasons of DS9 aired. I remember I talked about this before. I remember there being an article in Entertainment Weekly that count down, or maybe did a top 50 of the entire Star Trek franchise, which up to that point was only all of the original series, all of Next Generation. No, actually Next Generation up to the end of season 6, and then Deep Space Nine up to the end of season 1. And if I remember correctly, Captive Pursuit was the highest rated Deep Space Nine episode they had. It was their number 1 for DS9, mind you, beating out even Duet, which nowadays would seem apocryphal. I would probably also call it apocryphal. But back then, people seemed to love this episode. Generally speaking, it was seen as one of the best, if not the best, episodes of Deep Space Nine's first season. But, ironically, in more modern times, it is not looked on as highly, or at least to my eye. Some people do still think it's a decent episode, but there's not many people who would call it one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, whereas Duet, there are still many people who would call it one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, so that's what they see of the highlight of Season 1. This is just another decent episode. In fact, there's a lot of people who don't like this episode, or just think it's middling. Which is quite different than how it was perceived when it first came out. And I think the main difference or why it was perceived differently than it is compared to now, is because it resembles a Next Generation episode. Now, when Deep Space Nine was still new and only had 1 season to its name, that was seen as a good thing, because people were unsure of Deep Space Nine and they liked the Next Generation. That was Star Trek. That was the popular Star Trek thing. So if there's an episode that reminded them of Next Generation, then they would see that as an incredibly good thing overall, and probably why they picked it out as their favorite. But as the series went on and Deep Space Nine finished its run, and then we got Voyager and then Enterprise, a Deep Space Nine episode looking like a Next Generation episode was seen as a bad thing. That the people who liked the Deep Space Nine episodes typically did so because they were good Deep Space Nine episodes. Because by the time the show ended, the show has found its own voice and its own tone, and people liked it for its own merits, and in fact would hold it against episodes that too closely resembled Next Generation. This is definitely true for some of the worst or most disliked episodes of D Space Nine's first season, such as If Wishes Were Horses, or The Forsaken, or I don't know, other side plots, B plots of DS9 that involve technobabble and an anomaly, because they came off as too TNG-esque. And it was said that that was the main downfall of D Space Nine's first season, is that they tried too hard to be like Next Generation. Now, my opinion of this episode has not really changed over the years. I thought it was a good, decent episode when I first saw it, and I think it's a good, decent episode now. I am against those people who would hold the fact that it has a TNG feel to it against it, because unlike episodes like If Wishes Were Horses, which are terrible, that because they tried too much to be like TNG, this one actually does feel true to DS9, but at the same time has a kind of infusion of TNG feel to it, and it doesn't bother me. I don't think it doesn't try too hard to be like TNG with stuff like Q-less that brings in Q, or The Forsaken that brings in Lux and Troy and has some stupid technobabble side plot about some device from the Gamma Quadrant attaching itself to the station, acting like a puppy. Like, those are just bad imitations of Next Generation stories, where this comes off like a good episode of TNG, but not only that, it has the signature DS9 spin to it. It really helps develop O'Brien as a character, because he was only a supporting character on TNG. So now that he's a main character on DS9, this episode really fully helped develop him and gave him his own episode, and also you get a different feel for Sisko's style of command as opposed to Picard's, and Odo as the chief of security, and how things function and what it would be like for the station to be attacked. And this might be a controversial statement, because I do love the later seasons of DS9. When we get into the Dominion War, I think they're easily the best part of the show, particularly just the introduction of the Dominion. But I will say I think that something was lost, particularly when you get to see the Dominion War, when the Gamma Quadrant was closed off to the Alpha Quadrant. Is that you lose that it seems like the original concept of the wormhole was it was their cheat to explore the final frontier, because on a space station that goes nowhere, that you have the wormhole that goes directly, a pipeline to the other side of the galaxy that brings the final frontier to you. And, a lot of people thought that in the first two seasons this was used to mixed results, which I agree, but I like the concept of it. And it does, I know it was a necessity of the Dominion storyline to abandon it, because the Dominion's on the other side of the wormhole, so they need to close it so that all the ships, didn't come over and conquer the Alpha Quadrant. But I think you do lose that sense of wonder of exploring the unknown side of the galaxy. Now, granted, since it was airing, the later seasons of DS9 was airing at the same time as Voyager. Voyager was all about being in an unknown part of the galaxy, so maybe they felt that it was a bit repetitive, and so they let Voyager focus on that, where DS9 instead focused on the geopolitics of the Alpha Quadrant. But still, I think there is something to be said about the wonderment of having the wormhole being an exploration of the unknown, that they started to abandon actually in season 3, but it went away entirely by midpoint season 5. Or actually, no, end of season 5, more like season 6, because you got a couple of Gamma Quadrant episodes at the end of season 5, but still. So, And I think this episode is one of the best, most prime examples of using the Gamma Quadrant to good effect, to meeting a strange alien creature from the other side of the galaxy who's unfamiliar with the Alpha Quadrant, and seeing them sort of interact in that way. Move Along Home, maybe not not that good of an example of introducing aliens from the Gamma Quadrant, but this one I think actually is. I think it really works, and I do kind of miss it. Episodes like this one in later seasons. Now, as I said, like, I wouldn't change the later seasons for anything because the Dominion War was amazing, but I still kind of miss this kind of thing. Now, speaking of the Dominion, though, there was a lot of like B canon or fan head canons and just theories out there that fit the Tosk and the Hunters into the Dominion. Because some people pointed out that Tosk is actually kind of similar to the Jem'Hadar because it's kind of reptilian, can make himself invisible, and was genetically enhanced, genetically engineered to serve a purpose in battle. So I think there was a B canon out there that said that the Hunters were members of the Dominion, and that the Dominion, in order for them to be more obedient and to, because they were loyal members of the Dominion, they let them have their hunt just to keep them happy. And I can't remember if it was part of it that they actually used their genetic engineering technology to create Tosk. I think that might have been part of it, but I don't remember that. But so this is all just fun headcanon, but really none of this was thought of when they first created this being. It seems like that they probably took elements of Tosk and put them into the Jem'Hadar when they were writing them. They're like, hey, you remember that stuff we did back in season 1? What if we did something similar like that with the new bad guys? Like, I don't think there was really any thought given as to the background or the lore about it. Now, as for the nature of the Tosk and the Hunters, the whole theme of hunters hunting their prey that happens to be a sentient being. So the original idea for this episode was apparently based off of the short story The Most Dangerous Game, which I heard of. That is like this rich German guy brings someone onto this island, and they find out that his purpose is to hunt him. It's to hunt a human being. And I first heard of that short story. I never read it, but I first heard of it when I saw this movie in the 90s with what's his face? John Leguizamo or whatever his name is, called The Pest. It was a really annoying movie, but for some reason I watched it a couple times when it was on cable. It was just like a silly comedy, but they were making fun of. They did a parody of The Most Dangerous Game because they had the main villain was the German guy who was trying to hunt the pest for sport. I don't know, it was a bit silly. And then, of course, fans of Star Trek might recognize the title The Most Dangerous Game because there was an episode of Lower Decks called The Least Dangerous Game, which is probably one of my favorite episode titles ever. At least my favorite Lower Decks episode title. For some reason, I just love the play on The Most Dangerous Game is The Least Dangerous Game. I don't know, I just love that title. But in that episode, you have a hunter who likes to hunt people for sport, but he asked permission. He asked Boimler for permission to be hunted, and Boimler naively gave his permission because he was trying a new philosophy in life to say yes to everything, kind of like that Jim Carrey movie Yes Man. And of course this leads him to be hunted by this big scary predator looking monster thingy, but then eventually when he catches him, he doesn't actually kill Boimler. He just maims him a bit and says, "Oh no, I don't. This is catch and release. I don't actually kill my prey." And then Bourne had the whole speech where he's like, "The hunter has now become the hunted," and then that monster tank just shoots him, and he goes, "Ah!" He's like, "Can I give you some advice? Maybe to say the hunter's now become the hunter. You actually just can't stand there." I don't know, that episode's kind of funny. And then the other similarity to the hunting theme done in Star Trek, of course, is the Hirogen. I think I remember that my sister saw the episodes with the Hirogen before I did, and she was describing them to me and was saying, "Oh, it's kind of like those Tosk hunter things where it's like hunters going around hunting people," but a little different than this episode, because this episode is like a cultural ritual where they created genetically engineered being purposely for the purpose of hunting, whereas the Hirogen, they just go by and find other races that they just decide to hunt and they make them their prey, and they think that they have like a superiority complex. They think all the other aliens are inferior and just prey. So there's a difference, but there's also a similarity, definitely, there, to the whole hunter-prey theme. What I think is interesting, though, is that, because I was watching a review, and they were, like, curious as to why the Tosk was able to kick the hunter's ass. Like, they did that, the Tosk did that, like, huge jump, and, like, and then later, like, stole one of their weapons and fucking killed them. And so they were wondering, like, shouldn't the Tosk's job just be to run away, to evade the hunters? If the whole thing was about a hunt where they're chasing this down, shouldn't his main skills all have to do with evading? But I actually disagree, because I think that's why a lot of game hunters like hunting dangerous animals, the most dangerous game, like lions and elephants and tigers and stuff like that, because it's more of a thrill if what they're hunting could hunt them back, could actually kill them if it's seen as dangerous. So for me, it makes all the sense in the world that they would engineer Tosk to be dangerous, to be a badass fighter, because if the prey was just someone who just ran, and once they caught him, oh, that's it, you're dead, then where's the fun in that? They want to make it more of a challenge, and in fact make it so they could possibly be killed by their prey, which Tosk does kill the main hunter dude in this episode. So I think it makes a little sense. Now, for me, the heart of this episode, what makes it really good, is the friendship between O'Brien and Tosk. Especially like the unique way they played Tosk, where he goes, "Oh, Brian." Like, I remember he used to quote that a lot. And the way, that O'Brien is just trying to be really friendly with him and make conversation. Tosk is just like, acting a little strange. He's like, "I understand." It's like O'Brien says something like, "Oh, you never know what you'll find in a ship. You might even find someone who can make themselves invisible. Am I right?" And the Tosk is just like, "I understand." Like, it's a good, like, duo. In fact, O'Brien even makes the comment about Tosk being the most natural straight man that he's ever met, and you do get that with O'Brien kind of making jokes and being cheerful, and Tosk just being the straight man. But there is an issue with this episode, something I've heard a lot of people point out and complain about, and it is definitely an issue, and that's the fact it uses the trope, the cliche of the plot of the episode only happens because a character refuses to give other characters information, and there's no real reason why he wouldn't, because if he just explained from the beginning, oh yeah, no, my function in my society is to be prey for these hunters, and I'm on a hunt, so I need to get out of here because they'll come here to hunt me. Seems like he should have just said that. But, the reason why they didn't do it that way is so the episode can happen. Sorry. I do have to point out, I'm paraphrasing that phrase from Ryan George's pitch meeting, but it seems like I'm saying it all. It's become my catchphrase now, but I don't want to take credit for it because it was stolen, just to be fair. But anyway, still love using that. Because it's basically, so the episode could happen. And so that is a bit of a contrivance that's annoying. Because the excuse they give in this episode is Tosk says, I cannot discuss it. And when the hunters get there, it's like, did you break your vow of silence? He's like, no, I did not. But then after that, they just talk freely about their praying hunter. In fact, the hunter goes to Sisko and explains it all to him. So why do they have a vow of silence again? Like, what's the point of that? Like, why would they do this? Because they needed the plot to happen. That's why. There's no reason why Tosk wouldn't just be upfront. The whole vow of silence thing is just a plot contrivance so they could withhold this information from the audience. And so that part of it is annoying. It's always annoying, the whole cliche, the whole trope about characters withholding information just so the plot can happen, when it actually doesn't make sense why they're withholding this information. So that is a frustrating trope. But that being said, it doesn't bother me all that much. Like, I think some people seem to be a lot more bothered by this than I am. But I will admit it is annoying. But, I honestly don't think it's that big of a deal. Now, I do you get some great character moments with, Quark. I don't know if this is the only episode O'Brien calls him Barkeep. I think he might have mentioned it a couple other times in season 1, but I don't think it really stuck for that long. But I remember that me and my siblings always used to quote this a lot and always be like, Barkeep! And this is actually the first time I ever heard the phrase Barkeep before. He was like, I'm not a barkeep, I'm your proprietor. It's like, yeah, whatever, barkeep, just get me a drink. I thought that was a great scene. And I actually kind of, even though the humor is kind of silly, I like the thing where Quark is like, oh, well, let me help you. And O'Brien's talking about, oh, they have their rules, you have their rules. I suppose that for Ferengis, it would just change the rules. And Quark tries to talk like, well, rules. And O'Brien just interrupts him and is like, oh, that's it. Change the rules. Thanks, Barkeep. And then walks out, even though Quark didn't actually say anything. And then Quark is like, goes up to some other customers like, so what's troubling you today? It is a bit goofy, but also kind of funny. It's not the worst of the silly season 1 humor. It's acceptable. I shall take it. So I got to talk about Scott MacDonald, who played Tosk. I think he's a really good actor. He was really good in this role. He would go on to play 3 other roles in Star Trek, and all of them were really good. This was the first role that he did. He would appear in Face of the Enemy, which aired 1 week after this episode. So these episodes basically aired back to back. I'm not sure how long the difference was when he filmed it. Maybe he filmed this episode way before he filmed Face of the Enemy. I'm not sure about that, but I just know that the 2 of them aired a week apart. And he did a really great job in Face of the Enemy, playing the Romulan Nivek. I had no idea up until recently that was the same actor who did both these roles, and they did it back to back, and they came out at the same time. Later, he would also play a Jim Hadar in the Deep Space Nine episode Hippocratic Oath, which again, another amazing job. And then his most prominent role would come in Enterprise, where he played the recurring character of Commander Dolam, who was the main villain for season 3 Xindi arc of Enterprise. He appeared in apparently 8 episodes. Basically played the main villain. Was kind of a one-note villain, but I think he did a really, really good job in it. It's kind of similar to this role, actually, because that's kind of a one-note role as well. But I think he's a really good actor, and I think that he really enhances the episode. So another scene that I wanted to talk about was at the start of the episode, and I remember this scene. I remember it well, but I could never place what episode it was in, because I knew it was one of those early season 1 episodes, but it's irrelevant to the rest of the episode, so I couldn't remember which episode it was. And now I started watching this episode, and I saw the Dabo girl in Sisko's office. I was like, oh, okay, right, so it's this episode. So we get a scene where this Dabo girl goes to Sisko and complains about Quark sexually harassing her. And the funny thing is, and I never noticed this before, I was noticing it when I was watching this scene today, is that every time they're about to say what Quark is demanding, it's like, oh, Quark, he's demanding, he expects me to, and whenever they're about to say it, someone always cuts them off. Like, she's about to say it and Sisko cuts her off, or Sisko's about to say it and she cuts him off, and at the end of the scene, Sisko's about to say it, but then Kira calls and cut him off. So I think they were trying to avoid saying that he was asking for sex or blowjob or something like that. I think it was more than Umox, personally, but maybe not. But I think it was, and that Sisko was outraged by it and said, no, this is unacceptable. Apparently it was written into her contract, and so it was like the fine print thing, kind of like that Black Mirror episode with the Netflix making a show about their life. It was in the fine print that nobody reads. It's funny, in this episode they don't call it fine print, they call it Ferengi print, but I assume it's basically the same thing. Or unless it's in Ferengi, like, she can't read Ferengi. But anyway, Sisko is like, I don't know much about the law either, but this stops now. I will make sure that no one else is held to this provision. And so it would have been nice to see him go to Quark. So this is kind of, I brought this scene up before when I'm talking about the worst episode in the entire Star Trek franchise, Prophet and Lace. Because in that episode, they have a scene where Quark tries to convince one of his Dabo girls to give him Umox. And they kind of play it for comedy, and they play it for laughs. And at the end of the episode, the girl actually goes to him and was like, this is interesting. I want to do it. Let's do it. Which is really disgusting. It was like, you could tell it was an episode written by men. It was a really chauvinistic thing. And I compared that to this scene because this is doing that scene correctly. Because, I've heard it pointed out that the scene in Prophet and Lace was in character for Quark because Ferengi is so chauvinistic and despicable. But the thing is yes, I agree, it is in character for Quark to be chauvinistic like that, but the way it was written just makes it come off as chauvinistic. The fact that she comes back and says, yeah, I'm willing to do it, instead of, this is fucking sexual harassment. And so this is that scene being handled correctly, that the Dabo girls go straight to Sisko, which is what the other girls should have done as well, or at the very least quit. And Quark should be, he shouldn't be, this is 6 years or 5 years later, when he's doing that, when Sisko already had a talk to him about it, so he shouldn't be doing it by this stage. He should realize that Sisko is going to come down on him like a ton of bricks. But anyway, regardless, this is how it should have been handled. This how it was handled, actually, and they didn't need to repeat it but make it way, way worse in season 6. I don't know why the fuck they... Well, because that's the worst episode of the franchise. That's why. Now, as for Sisko letting O'Brien get away with it. I like that scene too when O'Brien was helping Tosk escape, and Odo's like, "Don't worry, he won't get far. I'll trap him in the force field." And Sisko's like, "Actually, Odo, there's no rush." And Odo took his meeting. It was like nods and just like slowly walks towards the turbo lift. It's kind of funny. But then it made for a really good scene at the end when when Sisko's dressing down O'Brien, and O'Brien goes to leave, and he's like, "One thing puzzles me. I thought that we would have been trapped by your force field." And Sisko's just like, "Well, I guess that one got by us." And O'Brien took his meeting right away. And what I noticed this time I watched is when O'Brien walks out, Sisko like smiles, has a big smile. So even though he was dressing down O'Brien officially, he actually was like totally on board with O'Brien and liked what he did. And I think that's a really nice touch. That is a really nice touch. And also, as I said, like the whole relationship between O'Brien and Tosk was well done and very much earned. And by the end, when O'Brien helps Tosk escape, and Tosk does this whole "die with honor, O'Brien," and O'Brien responds to "die with honor, Tosk." Like, that's touching. That was like really great. That was really well earned. So yeah, I mean, the action sequences with the weird dudes beaming in, not the best. It is apparently this is the first time Odo mentions that he never uses a weapon, a phaser, and never will, which will become a character trait for him. I was trying to think like if he mentioned this in the pilot episode, but I don't think he did. He did say he doesn't allow weapons on the promenade, but that's not the same thing as saying that he refuses to use weapons. So that's a different thing that he said in this episode. But yeah, overall, I just think that this was an exciting use of the concept of the Gamma Quadrant. Probably one of the best in the entire show, if I'm being honest. And it's a good O'Brien character story. So overall, I think it's, a very strong episode. So now I would like to thank all those that support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. I want to give a special shout out to Brandon Ilhouse. Thank you so much for all your support throughout the years. Very much appreciated. And I also like to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very much for your support. Alright, so we got a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "Captive pursuit, more like inaptive pursuit, 'cause I slept through this one." Yeah, that's not one of your better ones, I gotta be honest. Next comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, "The first episode that introduces the Gamma Quadrant species, which one wondered later whether or not the Tosk was genetically manipulated from the Dominion, but for now, just a new concept, which is interesting. More interesting is how O'Brien is not being an official officer, demonstrates the spirit of Starfleet with respect to the individual and to understanding his culture. O'Brien was a character we at least knew before, and while I know Bashir series wide will be the representation of the ideal Starfleet officer, one can also say to a certain point similar with O'Brien. Sisko shows understanding in how to handle O'Brien's defiance, and it's a nice single episode. Whether or not this can be seen more as a DS9 or TNG-like episode is another thing, but fine enough. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Yeah. This is a great episode for O'Brien. The way he made friends, represented Federation. It was a very good use of O'Brien. So next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I like this episode and a good one for O'Brien. Scott MacDonald played Tosk, and I didn't know he was in Face of the Enemy, and he played Sub-Commander Nivek, which I think was the good Romulan, as I haven't watched the episode yet, but I think it may be coming up soon. He also played Dahlem, the Xindi reptilian scumbag. I think Sisko put a stop to Quark's pimping and dabble girls for himself, or he gave an option in the future, as he did in that episode that we won't talk about. So my rating is 8 Ferengi barkeeps, or is that bar pimps, out of 10. But yeah, Scott MacDonald, really good actor, really good as Nivek. And actually, I knew about Nivek. It took me a while to realize he also played Tosk. Yes, as for Quark's pimping double girls, well, I would say more of sexual harassment. Sisko clearly put a stop to it, and he made it very clear it wasn't acceptable, but then you get that episode, which won't be named, except I already did name it earlier in this video, but still, no need to talk about that again. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, a strong episode with an interesting moral theme and a truly alien culture. The hunters reminded me of the Hirogen that I always found to be one or maybe even the most interesting Delta Quadrant species. The only thing that bothered me was the Oath of Silence. That was just a plot device to keep the mystery as long as possible. Again, Dax is almost non-existent in this episode. My rating is an 8 out of 10. Yeah, she had a couple technobabble yes sir lines, but that's pretty much it. Yes, absolutely. The whole Oath of Silence was just one giant plot contrivance and actually didn't make any sense. So next comment is from Ricky, who says, to me, this is the first great episode of DS9 and also a very unique one, as when the show goes on, it's going to be more focused on the Dominion and serialized storytelling. But for the earlier episodes, this one sticks out more because it deals with an alien from the Gamma Quadrant. And I gotta say, I was immersed in this episode. I really liked the last friendship between O'Brien and the alien, and I totally bought it when O'Brien helped the alien to escape captivity, and I was cheering for them. I also really loved the end scene when Sisko is scolding O'Brien and telling him what he did was wrong and against the Prime Directive, and after O'Brien leaves, we see Sisko making a smile and secretly happy that this happened. I do believe this is one of the stronger episodes of Season 1, so I love this episode, so my rating is a 9 out of 10. Every time I say O'Brien, I want to say O'Brien. It's just a classic episode. I totally agree. Like, the relationship between O'Brien and Tosk was very good, and I did like that distinct difference of Sisko. This is something Picard would never do, probably not even Janeway, of helping out O'Brien even though he disobeyed orders, where he yells at him and reads him the riot act, but then when he leaves the room he smiles. That was a nice character moment for Sisko, but overall, very strong episode for O'Brien and an interesting relationship with a new alien. So thank you so much, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for Captive Pursuit out of 10 is going to be a 9 excellent. Yeah, that's right. I'll give this a 9. I think I've given it a 9 in the past and people are like, whoa. It's not that good. But I think it is. I think it is definitely... I'm pretty confident in saying that this is the second best episode of Season 1. You all know what the best one is. And I think it's a strong O'Brien episode. It's a great Gamma Quadrant episode. It's uses characters like Sisko and Quark and Odo very well. Helps flesh out their characters on this station, and the friendship between O'Brien and Tosk, very well earned, and it was actually quite touching the way the episode ended with him saying "die with honor," and it's an interesting concept. So overall, I think it was a big success. Yes, it did have that annoyance of characters should have given information, the only reason why they didn't so the plot can happen. Yeah, that's annoying, but I don't think that's that big of a deal. I think it was overall a very strong episode. So that is it for my review of Captive Pursuit. So let's see what's coming up next on my channel. Let's see, where are we? Hold on. I need to find where... Okay, so Saturday I'll be over on Patreon to do a revisit it. This time revisiting my review for Face of the Enemy. Monday I'll be back here for a public review for the TNG episode Tapestry. And then on Thursday, a new review for DS9, Q-less. And on Saturday, another new DS9 review with Dax. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Next Generation and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.